about a minute.
All right, folks. It looks like the recording has been started. My name is Connie. I'm an account technology strategist here in the Mid-Atlantic region for Microsoft. And I just wanted to do a quick round of intros on the Microsoft side and kick us off. In terms of housekeeping stuff, we do appreciate keeping yourself on mute unless you do plan to talk, because as you know, these meetings can get very busy, and just want to make sure everybody can hear. You can also post things in the chat. Some of our folks will be monitoring the chat as we go through. But really excited to be having this webinar just for the Mid-Atlantic, just for our region. We are joined today by Andreas, who is the U.S. Education Lead for Teams Voice, which is really the kind of main topic for today. And also Scott Ellison, who is our Modern Workplace Technical Specialist in the Mid-Atlantic, and Andre Mitchell, another technical specialist who will be helping to monitor the chat as we go. So please go ahead and throw questions in the chat. You can also use the raise hand feature. I know we have 90 minutes, and Andreas wanted to make sure that we did have time for some Q&A at the end. So Andreas, I'm pretty much ready to hand it off to you unless there's anything else I forgot to say.
Yeah, no, that's great. So again, welcome everybody. This is going to be the Microsoft Teams Calling Overview webinar. I'm going to be doing kind of like a high-level overview at first, and then kind of finish things with a demo at the end, right? At any point, again, if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat window, and then we'll go ahead and have one of my other colleagues, either read the question out loud, or we'll figure out how to answer that. If they can answer it through the chat, they can do so. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit of my introduction. Again, my name is Andres Avendaño. I'm a U.S. Education Teams Technical Specialist, the Education Voice Lead as well. So I am here to do a Teams Calling overview. Now, to kind of dive in a little bit into this is going to be on getting started with Microsoft Teams calling and direct routing. Now, with Microsoft Teams, there's actually two ways to enable dial tone on your tenant, right? There's two ways to enable getting through the PSTN network for your telephone systems, right? One of them is what we call the Teams calling plans, and then the other one is the direct routing. And the way to differentiate between the two is to think of Teams calling plans as migrating to Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft becomes your telco provider, and direct routing as integrating with Microsoft Teams, and Teams becomes your soft client, right? And so those are the two ways of thinking about it, and thinking about it separately. Now, you don't have to go one way or the other, and I'll dive in deeper as we go along. Now, very great reminder for everyone here, if you're not already using Teams, right? Teams telephony is not just all that Teams is capable of. It's just one of many aspects of what Teams as a whole, as a hub, is capable of, right? We have mobile calls, telephony, live broadcast events such as this, online meetings, PBX, instant messaging, right? We're taking all of that, and staying connected in real time more than ever is extremely essential now, right? As people are not able to communicate physically like we used to. And so Microsoft Teams is bringing it all together. And again, Teams is a platform, right? So if there's any customization, if there's anything that you need to add on to it, you have the full capabilities of doing so, and being able to customize and bring everything that you need to right into Teams to have a single hub for collaboration and communication. And so that is what our Microsoft Teams platform allows you to do. Now, focusing on calling, right, for the purpose of this webinar, is that we've done a lot of work, right, into our Microsoft Teams platform, and I'll dive into what that means. So our platform, right, we have an array of different services that provide a telephony service for Microsoft Teams and phone systems, right? But that's only part of it. We've also expanded a lot of resources to making sure that our platforms, right, from a application standpoint, whether that's Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, web apps, right? All of them have a single unified experience for the best for all end users to interact with, right? So whether at work everybody's on a workstation, they might be using a Windows device, but at home they prefer to use Mac. That's okay. That doesn't mean that the end user experience should be different or that subpar to each other. So we've done a lot of work to making sure that all of our platforms are pretty much on par with feature. Now, there's a few things here and there that one might have that the other doesn't, but that might be dependent on the OS, not necessarily on us lacking resources, right? We've done a lot of work to making sure that the end user experience is similar across all platforms, right? And so that goes for video and content sharing as well. Okay. And so with that, we add on as well PSTN calling, right? And we make that available through two ways, like I mentioned earlier. One is with calling plans, the other one is with direct routing. Regardless of which one or both, right, you are going to have a true cloud voice solution. Again, to my point earlier, even if you go with direct routing, you're gonna be leveraging the Teams microservices to then allow you to essentially say, you have a standardization across your organization for calling, and you can take advantages of some of the features and benefits of Teams as well. If you want to get away from the infrastructure maintenance piece, you can also do things like go with calling plans, and then you no longer have to have any infrastructure, right? You can get rid of your PBXs, you can get rid of your of your appliances, maybe your session border controllers if you have any. You can start to consolidate a lot of it, right? And then really focus on what you truly need to keep on premise. And then you can, of course, have that hybrid approach, right? Some here, some there, and then figure out what's best for you, right, in your organization. So with that, right, we start to get into the collaboration and voice together. Like I mentioned earlier, Teams is not just calling; it is a hub for collaboration and communication. So it tries to pull the best of it. So kind of moving on with phone system, you know, first of all, like what is it? Well, first, the PBX is a company's phone system, and it's mostly implemented out of hardware on premises. And Cloud PBX is when combined with PSTN calling is your phone system in the cloud, right? So kind of what I was mentioning earlier, that phone system is our sort of our Cloud PBX. And again, I don't like the night to say that it's our Cloud PBX because we're not taking a traditional PBX from on-premise, moving it to the cloud and just changing the services, right? We essentially built an entirely new service in the cloud using Azure microservices, right? And establish an entire phone system out of it. Now we can integrate with traditional premises PBX systems, right, using direct routing, but our phone system is very different than a traditional PBX. And so with that, you kind of have advantages, right? And regardless of which way you go, whether it's with calling plans or direct routing, you're going to be able to. Someone have a question? Okay, sorry, somebody came off mute. Regardless of whether you go with calling plan or direct routing, phone system is the back end, right? Phone system is the backbone of everything that you're going to need to do in order for telephony to work with Teams, right? Fully integrated or fully migrated, depending on which way you go. This is going to be what's required for both, right? And so for that, right, you have some advantages where you can do certain things, right? One, you can simplify your IT. To my point earlier, if you want to get away from the appliances or the hardware management, right, maintenance contracts that are very expensive to continue, sustaining, can be replaced, right, or can be taken out of the equation, right, when it comes to doing telephony. You can also take advantage of, if you're supporting multiple countries, right? Some campuses are global. Some schools are partnering with research facilities in other countries. They have multiple campuses in multiple countries. They're supplying education to a worldwide audience, right? So you have to have telephony available, not necessarily just in the US, but you also need telephony across the world. And so, Microsoft being a global company, we do provide our phone systems on a global scale. So, our PBX, our phone system, right, is available globally. So, if you need to integrate with telephony systems in other countries, or if you want to migrate them out of that into Teams, you have the option for that. That kind of goes into the scale globally, right? There's multiple ways doing it in the U.S. and several dozen other markets. Microsoft is a first-party telecom provider, meaning we do not offload our contracts, right? So if you go with us and you decide you want to purchase calling plans with us, we're not offloading that into another provider. Microsoft, we are a telco provider, and we're actually one of the largest in the world due to the amount of fiber we're running worldwide. So we run your contracts, we hold your BTNs, we hold your CSRs, right? We essentially are a full telco providers. So what that means is that if you are maybe working in a country that we do not provide telephony services as a first party, you can still go with direct routing, where we have partnered with service providers worldwide to allow for seamless integration between Teams and worldwide service providers and PSTN providers. So if you need to integrate with if you're working in Australia, right, there's Altiris, right? I think it's Altiris, that they'll directly point their PSTN service directly to Teams, and they'll even host their session border controllers directly. And they'll host it and manage it for you, so it's still a seamless experience. Okay. Some features that included into your phone system, right, are you can place, receive, and hold calls. That means initiate by name or number, not just the IDs anymore, right? Call answer, call hold. You also have to have the ID numbers assigned, right? Teams has a unique advantage that it is user affinity, meaning that if your end users need telephone support in multiple locations or multiple desk phones, right? You no longer have to provide them multiple DIDs. They essentially have a DID that follows them no matter where they are. Again, to my point earlier that we have done a lot of legwork to making sure that end users have the best experience. Meaning that if they need to take a call on their desktop or workstation in the office or on campus, and they need to take that call on the go and need to switch to the mobile device, they can easily transition, and that DID will follow them through. And I'll show that in the demo. Now, we also have device switching, right? Being able to switch between devices, kind of to my point earlier. We've done some AI components on that, so that way you're not necessarily struggling. So when I'm switching from my mobile device to my desktop or my workstation, I'm not necessarily, having to unmute my desktop or having to mute my mobile device and get that really bad echo, right? Or drop one call before I join the other. Like it's sometimes with the previous experience, right? It's been very disconnected, and so we've done a lot to making sure that that experience is very seamless. Now we have distinctive ringing. We have being able to different ringtones based on call types. Federated calling, if you are working with other organizations that are using Teams telephony or just even Teams overall, you can do Teams peer-to-peer calling. So think of that as like the old cell company, right? Singular in the US. They would not charge you minutes for every time you called somebody that was inside of the Singular network. So you could call, if you had a family plan and it was like you, your siblings, your parents, you could call each other as much as you want. You would not be charged any minutes because you were all inside of the network. So it's very similar with Teams. If you're calling other Teams users, you will not incur any minutes or any charges. It will just be a peer-to-peer call or voice over IP. With call history, you have user-facing call history, as you see in the screenshot here. And then you have call detail records. Administrators can get reports on who made the call, when they made the call, how long, and with who they were calling, right? So those are the things that you can get reports on. It's an API, so you can generate your own custom reporting. And then, of course, you can add additional participants on one-to-one calls. At the current time, the way that that functions is that when you add additional members on a one-to-one call, Teams switches the call from a PSTN call to a Teams or a PSTN meeting. So it changes from call to meeting, and therefore you can add additional users to that call. Okay. All right. So some additional features that we have is that we have the ability to transfer calls, right? Again, with transferring calls, you have blind transferring, which you can just immediately send the call to somebody else. You can also do mobile transfers, right? Where you can transfer, like when you're have a call on hold and you want to transfer the call, you can transfer to another PSTN number. So that's essentially mobile transfer means a PSTN number. It doesn't necessarily mean internally, right? And then you have consultative transfer, which is what you have on the screenshot here. So it's the consultant transfer, and what you can do is essentially when you click that, you pick the person that you want to consult with. You can chat with them, or you can select the call button and basically do a warm handoff. So you can select, hey, I need to send so-and-so to this, I need to transfer them to you. This is what I've done. I've worked with them on this. They tried that. It didn't work. I'm kind of stuck here. Could you assist me? And then you can transfer the call. Okay, so that's the consultative transfer. Caller ID, reverse number lookup. And what that means is when you're receiving a call, if there's a contact information on the call, like if you're getting a call from, if you're getting a call from the campus, right, and you're calling parents, the parents will see your contact information, right? Things like that. That would be the reverse number lookup. Otherwise, if there's no contact information, only the phone number will be displayed. On the sending side, right, you can actually do three things for caller ID. You can display the personal ID assigned to you in Teams. You can also mask your personal ID with a service number. So if you have call agents and you want to call somebody, you can essentially call them using, and it'll mask the number with that service number. So that way, when they call back, it'll go back to the main auto attendant, right? So you're masking that and nobody can get that personal ID within Teams. Then the last one is anonymous, right? Anonymous calling. And then call history, again, we have a lot of reporting either on the Teams Admin Center through Call Quality Dashboard. We have also that Call Quality Dashboard data that you can import into Power BI. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to manipulate that data as well. So any questions on the chat that Scott or Andrew you want to bring up, or keep going?
No questions on the chat, Andres.
Okay, perfect. Just want to give people a chance to ask questions if there's any. All right. So what I want to do now is I'm going to be jumping into emergency calling. This is a very, very important topic when it comes to dealing and moving, right, with telephony, right? Especially as Raybaum's Act and Kerry's Law are coming into place here in the next, I think it's this year, maybe early next year. I can't remember because they changed the timeline. Okay, so what I wanted to say is that with emergency calling, there's two ways to go about it, and each way depends on whether you're going with calling plans, right? So migrating to Microsoft, or if you're integrating with Microsoft, it's done very differently. So the first one that I'm going to be focusing on is going to be, of course, with Microsoft Calling, because Microsoft Calling does include your calling plans does include emergency calling as part of your licensing, so you don't have to pay additional for that. And the way that it works with Microsoft Teams is whether you go with calling plans or direct routing, the Teams client itself, right? Windows, Mac OS, Android, iOS, those 4 clients, and I believe Linux as well, do support emergency calling. And the reason for that is because the Teams client for those platforms constantly are gathering an accurate location from your network. Now, web applications or the Microsoft Teams web app does not support emergency calling. That doesn't mean it won't in the future, but right now it just doesn't support it. But what I mean by it gets the location for your network is that Teams relies very heavily on network location-based routing. So there are some responsibilities that fall on the customers when it comes to getting ready for this, meaning that your network has to be able to provide a location. So if your subnets or your switches or switch ports already provide a location, right? So if you have like an address or a floor level or a room level, depending on what the level of granularity is, you can certainly be able to provide some very granular location onto what you can definitely do some of that location management inside of your network. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have to input that location information, your network appliances and your network locations into Teams, right? And there's 2 places to do that. So we give you a location information system, so an LIS. We give you that database that you have to update. So every address that you support, every location that you support, you will have to go ahead and input that into the LIS. And so Teams then, the other part is that you're going to have to actually physically input your appliances information into the Teams admin center, so that when it comes to wireless access points, you have your MAC address or your GUI ID, right? Different appliance information, you're actually going to be able to input that information right in there. And so what's going to happen is that once you do that, then Teams, when it gets a network and it finds that, okay, this is the actual location that I am, then it's going to cross-reference it with your location information system. And so when you get that match between what Teams has gathered from your network and it matches the location in your LIS, you get a verified location, and then it automatically routes it to the PSAP, to the appropriate PSAP, right, the local PSAP. And so I understand that right now there is no, it's not consistently the case, right, with COVID, where everyone might be working in an office or everybody might be working from necessarily a static location that is within a managed network, right? They might be working from home, they might be working in the office, they might be switching between back and forth, right? It's not consistent. So we have to be able to address those 2 scenarios separately, right? And be able to say, I can still provide an emergency calling service, right? And we do. With Microsoft Calling Plans, you also get our Emergency Anywhere service, meaning that if at any point Teams gets a location, right? And maybe you're at home, so it's getting the location from your local ISP in Windows Location Services or Apple Location Services, right? And it gets the location, but it's not matching anything in the LIS because your LIS database only supports, or you're only supporting, as an organization, you decided you're only supporting campus locations or, actual work locations. And that's fine, right? And so what's going to happen is it's going to go through our National Screen Center, which is going to connect them with an operator. The operator will then ask to verify the location. Right, like my ISP, and I tested this a couple of times, my ISP tells me that I'm 2 houses down, right? And that's okay. It's not too far off, but it's still a little bit of a discrepancy, right? And so the number is a little bit off. So what's going to be nice about this is that when you call the operator, you can give them the full number, right? Like your full address, and then what they'll do is they'll go ahead, okay, update the address, and then send it to the PSAP. Okay. So that's the really nice thing about that. Now, what happens when Teams is not able to get a location? That can also happen. Regardless, it's going to get the static location that you've assigned to a user, right? In part of the process, and I'll show you this during the demo, is that when you assign a number, you have to assign a static address to a user, and they'll get that static address. Now, the operator will go ahead and say, is this where you are? Now, the user can go ahead and say, no, that's not where I'm at. This is my current address, and then it'll get routed to the appropriate PSAP, right? The final scenario is something that we will address in the future, as you know, there's a lot of privacy concerns that we had to deal with, but we are getting through that, is that we ran into the challenges, you know, as there might have been scenarios where you're calling E911 and you cannot speak, but your current address is not the most accurate. So what happens in those scenarios where you have to make an emergency call and you have to be able to say, or give out an accurate location without having to speak, especially when you're dealing with an operator. So something that we have built, and for those of you that are familiar with like emergency services, right? Intrado service, emergency location manager, we are building something similar to that natively into Teams. That is something that we announced recently, and that is coming here in the next few weeks to a month in public preview, and hopefully in general availability by summertime. And so what essentially it's going to be, it's going to be a process for you to update your location and verify, and the verification process requires you to input GPS location coordinates, right? Which you can get from Google Maps or you know, or Azure or Bing Maps, essentially any location manager, any map services, you can get GPS location coordinates, and that requires a verification. Essentially, you can do that manually. So it would come down to the end user manually being able to input their location, verify it during time of login, right? And so during the time that they need to make an emergency 911 call, they have a verified location, and it will still go through the operator, right, just for verification. And if they cannot speak after a certain amount of time, they have a standard operating procedure to still route it to the appropriate PSAP, right? And so that is something that we are building natively into Teams. So those are all going to be through calling plans that I've talked about. With direct routing, I have mentioned services like Intrado, RedSky, Bandwidth, Duet. Those you can actually, you would have to purchase those services separately, and then figure out how to integrate that to Teams using direct routing, right? Whether that be the Intrado's service connecting to your session border controller, if you're using emergency location identification numbers, right? If you're using like Cisco and you're using Cisco with ELIN through Cisco Emergency Responders, right? Those things you can essentially integrate directly into your session border controller and then have that with Teams, right? And Teams can associate ELIN to be able to provide that as well. So the last thing on emergency calling is that you can configure your security desk notifications. So I understand there's some campuses that may have their own campus police, and they want to have calls routed to them. So what you can do is you can essentially take your calls, and anytime anybody makes an emergency 911 call, if your campus police is enabled with Teams, they will get a Teams notification with who made the call, where the call was made at what time, right? And the other options you have is you can conference them into the emergency call, but they are muted. You can also opt in to be conferenced into the call, but be unmuted. When you conference them in muted, they cannot unmute themselves. But if you conference them in unmuted, they can mute themselves, and then if they need to, unmute themselves and continue to talk. So it just depends on how you want to set this up. So you have various options. Now, kind of getting into what it means to do direct routing, right? So this is the other way of integrate or setting up telephony with Microsoft Teams. And this is the integration method. So we have our phone system, which again, phone system is going to be the backbone to everything connecting to Teams telephony. And then it requires you to have a certified session border controller. Now we have partnered with a lot of different vendors. I think we have over a dozen vendors, right, that are certified for Microsoft Teams. And essentially you can take a certified session border controller, connect it to Teams natively, and then you can work with your PSTN provider. Now we have direct integrations with a lot of different carriers like CenturyLink, AT&T, Verizon, I think Windstream, I can't remember, but there's a list of carriers that we have direct partnership with. And so they know exactly what to do. If you want to host your own session border controller, by all means, you can do so. If you don't want to get into continue being in the business of maintaining hardware appliances and on premise, you can work with your carrier and do something called Operator Connect. Operator Connect, essentially, you're going to work with your carrier. They can work with they can essentially host that session border controller either on their tenant, right? So it'll be a fully hosted and they'll maintain it, they'll patch it, they'll do all the legwork for it. They'll just connect to your third-party PBX. So if you have Avaya, if you have Cisco, if you have, I'm trying to think of any other ones like Mitel, right? You can connect it, right? And essentially you would have to then dictate the call flow that goes between your PSTN provider and the session border controller / third party. I have some customers that basically have the PSTN provider flow all zip trunks, all calls directly to the session border controller. And if it needs to reach like a Cisco phone, right, a Cisco IP phone, it goes down to the third party PBX. If it's a Teams user, then it goes to Teams, right? I have some that are like, I need to have all calls go through Avaya, right? My Avaya system is what's directly integrated to my emergency calling. I need to have it go through there. So from there, it basically then goes to like, okay, I need to have it go to Teams, or do I need to retain it? It's an internal call, essentially. It's another Avaya phone, so I need to retain it here, right? And so there's a lot of, I would say, flexibility, but with flexibility comes complexity into being able to do these type of configurations, right? Now, what I've seen is that a lot of customers want to move end users away from having to retain on-premise, right, infrastructure telephony, but they're retaining a lot of their analog devices on-premise, and that makes a lot of sense, right? And transforming or migrating analog into digital it's a whole project of its own. So, right, leaving that as is and just integrating with Teams is probably what's going to be the easiest route, right? So if you already have ATAs, right, analog telephony adapters, you can essentially integrate that with certified session border controllers, and some OEMs already have it built into their SBCs. If you don't have ATAs, right, and essentially what you can do is just integrate that directly into Teams. So what we start to see is that we start to see this model of like some or most end users are on calling plans, right, for simplicity. And then we have your analog, so Blue Campus Life, fax machines, right, elevator phones that are all analog, staying on direct routing, and that goes into your PSTN network. And so with that, we have, these are all the list of direct routing partners that we have with. We have a lot more partners now, so we can put that list into, oh, there it is already. There's the list of certified session border controllers. And so if you want to go ahead and talk to any of them, you can reach out to any of us. We have contacts in all of these, or most of these, and we can definitely get demos or at least an overview of what that looks like from a direct routing stance. Okay, so diving in a little bit into the analog stations, right? So analog stations are still pretty crucial to a lot of organizations, right? From a telephony standpoint, like I mentioned earlier, you still have elevator phones, right? You still have Blue Campus Light phones, right? which are really essential, right? Because those would connect you directly to your emergency response team, right? Whether that be campus police or that be an actual police force, right? That might be assigned to your campus or district. And so they are brought in again through direct routing. And this is kind of like a little bit more of a concentration on the ATAs, right? So you have your session border controllers, you have your ATAs, and then you can basically connect your POTS or your fax clients, right, directly into it, right? So again, session border controllers, you have like SBCs, I know ribbons and audio codes have ATAs built into them, so you can see that analog goes directly to the SBCs. Some of them, essentially, you can just have it go through an ATA if you have that. And again, there's a lot of different complexities and kind of flexibilities with each one of these. Okay. So kind of diving in a little bit into like the into more advanced features with call queues and auto attendance. So call queues and auto attendance are included inside of your team's licensing. You do not have to pay additional for this. And these provide some very basic contact center solutions. So auto attendant allows you to have configurable multi-level interactive voice response, so IVR. Auto attendants allow you to have business hours, directory search, dial scopes. Call queues allow you to have those hunt groups that you can configure your whole music, your ring pattern. So if you want to ring everybody at once, one by one, everybody gets the same amount of calls or the longest idle. And of course, you have the flexibility to assign your PSTN numbers as needed, whether you have DIDs, toll-free, multiple numbers, or multiple regions, right? You can assign them as well as hybrid with direct routing. So if you have multiple public-facing, numbers, right? Like if maybe you support a region that still doesn't allow for national calling, they may still have the limitations of local calling, and you need to provide numbers, right, for multiple area codes. That's where the advantages of having multiple numbers come in place, right? So call queues, again, and I'll kind of go over this in a demo. Provide organizational greeting, music when people are waiting on hold, supports redirecting of calls and agents, and provides settings for call queues and maximum size. And then auto attendance, corporate informational greetings. This is actually pretty cool because you can actually do custom corporate menus, and this can be done on text-to-speech on multiple languages. So you can get real-time changes to your menu playback as well as your announcements that you can do. You can also support specific holidays and business hours, so you can set that from a tenant level and break that down into the individual auto attendants. And then you can transfer calls to operators, other users, other call queues, and other auto attendants as well. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about, well, actually, second to last thing before I get into the demo, is the contact centers, right? So most people are thinking that teams can only provide solutions around the end user, right? End user telephony, and that is true. Natively within Teams, that is what we can do. Again, I'll show you some of the contact center solutions that we have built into Teams natively, but we have contact center partners. So if you want to get into like the really robust contact center solutions, when we start getting into like skill-based routing, customized call tree flows, CRM integrations, Dynamics integrations. If you want to get into like the compliance recording, so automatically recording, Microsoft Teams only allows for convenience recording, meaning that you can only record manually. But if you want to get into like automatic call recording, whether for security, like your police department needs to have all their calls recorded, those are the things that we rely on contact center partners for, right? And there's three ways to kind of integrate, right, with Microsoft Teams. One is the connect, which is via direct routing. That's going to be the least integrated, meaning that it's going to leverage the calling system to be able to make calls, and that's about it, right? Connect and extend, direct routing, graph APIs, Teams app platforms. That's going to be a little bit more integrated, meaning it's not just going to be like the calling. You might have some applications that are built into Teams or some workflows that are integrating Teams, right, for contact center solutions. And then extend and power, that's essentially doing everything inside of Teams, where you have the entire contact center solution right into Teams, right? You have your automate customized call flow trees, you have your skill-based routing, you have your you have the entire you have the entire contact center solution right into Teams. So if you want to build your live dashboards, if you want to do your entire compliance recording, if you want to integrate with like ServiceNow, Jira for like open ticketing systems, those are the things that you can do. If you want to do like the management walk-in silently or interruption, like abrupt interruption, those are the things that you can do with these contact center partners. Okay. We do have, these are some of the lists, and again, we can add the list of partners that we work with. Again, more are now available than before. 10-4 and Landis Technologies are the two that are fully Teams native. Everyone else is somewhere in the direct or the direct and connect, so somewhere in the middle. Okay. Alrighty, and so the last thing I want to talk about is going to be devices, right? With Microsoft Teams calling, you're not tied to just desk phones. That doesn't mean you don't have the option for desk phones. That just means you're not tied to it, right? So you can give your end users the flexibility to choose what personal device they want to work with. So I have some customers that basically did a survey of their end users, specifically during COVID times, and they were very surprised at the fact that only a very, very small percentage of users wanted to keep using a desk phone. The majority of them had gotten accustomed to, earbuds, or like I really love my like Puck. Like I have one of those personal audio devices, right? One of the Jabra, the Sennheisers, like 710 or SP30, those little Pucks. I love those, right? Because one, I'm not wearing earphones, and two, the quality of the sound as well as people hearing me is pretty crisp, and I don't have to hold the phone, right? A hand phone. So that's something that I really enjoy. But again, some people might like to have a desk phone. Some people might want to have buttons, right? And those are the things that you can choose, and you can see like the different catalog of devices, right? Some have buttons, some is a really flat screen, right? Which during COVID time, some people prefer that because then it's easy to wipe, right? With a sanitizing wipe. Those are the things that you kind of have to think about and kind of decide internally. So yeah, I mean, the SP, the pucks are really nice, so I saw that. But essentially, those are kind of the flexibilities now. But that ties into the whole Teams ecosystem, right? We also have devices for your conference rooms, right? As we start to slightly see the light at the end of the tunnel, right, with COVID, and people are starting to get their vaccines, and we're starting to plan for how is it going to be returning to work, right? We're starting to see that it's not going to be entirely, everybody go at once. We're starting to see that the trend is going to be a hybrid workforce, right? Being able to work remotely as well as being able to work in the office, and how to accommodate both, as well as how to accommodate both in a very interactive way and still be able to collaborate the way we have been, right? And if not, improve the collaboration, because there's room for improvement, right? And so we have our systems called Microsoft Teams Rooms, and we have some integrations that we've done to be able to integrate with telephony, as well as integrating with other third-party solutions. So we have solutions with like Poly, Pexip, BlueJeans, and Cisco. So if you have like a WebEx room or a Zoom room, right, and you've already invested in that infrastructure, that's great. If you still want to leverage Teams, right, because you're standardizing on Teams, you can use one of these 4 systems to take your current hardware infrastructure and then essentially use their solution and then be able to leverage Microsoft Teams natively within those hardware, right? So taking advantage of the hardware investment you've already done. But if you're looking to invest in new hardware, right, we also do support our own hardware, so Microsoft Teams Room. And with us, we actually have something called Direct Guest Join. So if you are, and this is perfectly fine, we see it all the time where you've bought into Microsoft, you're using Teams, but you also want to have some sort of backup, or maybe you're working with other organizations that are using like WebEx or Zoom. So that's where we have Direct as Join, meaning that they can send you Zoom meetings or WebEx meetings, and you can still leverage our Microsoft Teams rooms. And without having to expend so much effort, you can actually get native WebEx meetings or native Zoom meetings right into our Microsoft Teams hardware. So we've done a lot of those integrations natively into Teams in our Teams hardware. Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump in right into a demo. So let's see here. Let me transfer my devices. All right, let me know when you can see my screen. Thumbs up, we can use the emojis.
Can see it, yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so what I have here is I have 3 personas, right? Because I want to show direct interaction between all of them. One thing you'll notice is that I'm using the web apps. I also like to reference the fact that I have my Teams client, right? So if I'm using my Teams client here on my desktop, it's also very similar, right? It doesn't change much. If anything, the only reason it's different is because I have an internal version of the Teams client. But it's all very, very similar. I also want to showcase mobile client, right? So you want to get the same experience, right? You want to be able to get the same experience as you go in the mobile. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Here. All right. There it is. Start now. There it is. All right. So same thing, right? You can actually get into my mobile client. It's very similar. You have the very similar end user experience so that you're not necessarily running into any of these, right? So my speed dial, voicemail, right? I can get into all of these, my call history, very similar. I can still make calls, right? Those are everything that we have. Now, as you notice here, I have it's telling me, right? Teams voice webinar for education customers. Join or share content, right? So this is what I was talking about using smart transferring devices, right? So if I click join, I can actually, it tells me, how would you like to join this device? Add this device or transfer to this device, right? So if I wanted to take this call on the go, I could do that. It would drop me from my current device, add me on this one, and I don't have to have that nasty echo or like fumbling around. Or if I wanted to add this device, it'll add my device. It'll add my device and it'll actually do it muted. And I'll do this in a little bit, but and I'll do it to do a demo later on. But what I'm going to do right now is essentially that's what I wanted to showcase for that. But I'm jumping in, right? So we have our numbers, right? And we have our DID. So this is the DID that we have assigned for each one of the users, right? So if I go to dial a number, we have DIDs assigned, right? So everything's pretty standard here. Now, one thing I wanted to showcase is that when I'm dialing some, numbers, I saw a question around shared line appearance, right? So, or having multiple lines. And this is where you can actually do so. So I'm a delegate. So it tells me right here, people you support. That means I'm a delegate of this person, right? So that means if I need to call somebody, I can call them as myself, or I can call on behalf of Adele, right? So I can make that call to, and what I can do is actually, instead of doing that, let me show call. I want to show their number. There it is. Yeah. So they have a phone number assigned to them, right? And so what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and call. What's the number? There it is. Okay, dial the number. All right, 540-952-9646, right? 9646. I'm going to call on behalf of Adele, right? So I'm going to go ahead and allow. And so it's going to make this call, and then it's telling me, right? And so there you go. So as I start to make this call, right, and I start to get into this call, I have a few options here. So again, as before, we have hold, we have transfer, right, and then we have consult and transfer, which is what I was showing earlier, right, in the presentation. So with hold, very simple, transfer, very simple, right? I can just pick a person and transfer the call. Call parking is actually really neat. So that's where, you put the call on park, you select the line, or you'll get a line assigned to it. And essentially that's when you say, like, it could be over the intercom, phone for John Smith on line 10, right? And then the person can go onto the Teams client, they can say pick up call, park call, and then they'll put line 10, and they can pick up the call like that, right? You can then consult and transfer. So if you wanted to consult, I can say, you know what, Alex, I want to transfer this. I think this is more for you. And essentially this is where you can start to message them. Hey, Alex. All right. This call. Essentially, all that's going to do is essentially just going to be a message, right? They can jump into it and say, okay, send it my way. Okay. And there you go. And then we can transfer the call. And so I've been put on hold, right? And now I'm being transferred. And so now, essentially, that's all that happens. Transfer the calls. I'm here. Call's been transferred. And now I can say, okay, let me put the call on park and say, I'm being parked. And now I'm on hold, right? And so it tells me the park code. So if I wanted to go back here now to calls, park calls, I can say call pickup on code 10, right? And now I can retrieve the call. I apologize for that. But yeah, essentially I'm just transferring the call and then I can retrieve calls as needed within here. And this whole time, all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and calls now. Right, if I go back to my things, everything was being shown under Adele. So if we go into her call history, we'll be able to see that the whole call was done on Adele's phone number. So from there, we can also add speed dials, right? So you can essentially add people or numbers as part of speed dial. You no longer are limited, right? So if I need to call and it's somebody in, like, internally, if I call them and it's a Teams user, then essentially it's going to do a Teams to Teams call. So I don't have to worry about any minutes. With Teams, again, whether it's PSTN calls, right, or external calls, you only get charged per minutes when it's dial out. So only when you're dialing out. Outbound calls are the only ones that are going to charge you minutes. Okay. Again, with your contacts, you can add contacts here, history, right? You see call history, and then voicemails. Of course, everything's like integrated into this. Now with voicemails, you also have multi-language support. So as you can see here, I did a call and then it was just in Spanish, and it actually did it in Spanish. And when I go to my Outlook, and I search for voicemails, I think there it is. So when I do in Spanish, it actually transcribes it and translates it to English as well. So it does multi-language support, and it'll actually translate it to the native language of your choice. So if your choice of language in your Office 365 tenant is English and you get calls on multiple languages, you're going to get that translation automatically. And you get the audio file as well. All right. There you go. So yeah, so now if you wanted to go back now, starting going through calls, the last thing I wanted to show you was that before I jump into call queues and auto attendance, your settings, right? So if you want to do delegations as well, so if we go here, you can set up delegations right within your own settings, right? So you can go into manage delegations. You can say, these people I have added you as a delegate, view permissions. I can make calls, receive calls, change calls. I also have my own delegates, and this is where I can say I want to edit my permissions. I can things this delegate can do on your behalf, make calls, receive calls, and then change calls on my behalf, right? Things like that. So I can completely change my settings from within here. Of course, now I have privacy, so you can change your do not disturb and add priority access, right? Block contacts. And then of course with calls, you can rings. So this is a pretty cool thing where you can do is like call group, which is what I saw some of the other solution is like if you have like a department phone and you don't necessarily want to limit it to just that phone and you want it to call other people, you can essentially say, I want to call everyone in this group, right? If the call is not picked up, right? So if forward, you could either call rings me, also ring my call group, right? Or, no one else, right? And then if unanswered, then it call my call group, right? And it'll ring for 20 seconds and then you can do your call group. So you can kind of manage that yourself. Now you also have your call queues, which I'm about to jump into here really quickly, is that you have a list of queues that you support, and you can also toggle on or off which ones you want to support. So you can opt out of taking calls for a specific queue within here. Okay. So now jumping into like a little bit of the admin center. So I'm gonna expand this a little bit more. So there's a lot of different things that you can set up, right? So what I was alluding to earlier is that you have your emergency addresses. Now your emergency addresses here are static, right? So, and they're validated addresses because they have, if I jump in here, they have GPS coordinates locations, right? So, and let it load, let it load, let it load. Yeah, okay. Okay. So, all right, well, it has a location and a location ID as well. But you can also add locations within here, and each one of those locations you can actually, and there's phone numbers assigned to it, right? You can add subnets, right? You can add Wi-Fi access points. You can add switches and ports, right? And so what's going to happen is if you add ports, it'll actually do the port number as well as the chassis ID, so that when Teams detects that information, it'll automatically associate it with this location. And you can even add places here. So you can say building A, floor 5, suite, 500. So this is where you start to get to really granular and categorize all the different locations from within Teams. So I usually like to start with, plan how granular you want to get with locations, because it can get really, really granular. And then once you start do that, then you can start to associate like the subnets, access points, right, switches and ports. Now you can also do your network topology from within here, like network sites. You haven't created a network site, right? This is where you can do a location-based routing, right? And then you can add subnets from within here. You can also add network regions. So there's a lot of different things that you can do within here. You can even get more granular, so with networks and locations, so you can get to the subnets, right? IPv4 you have version, and we support IPv6. This is where you can get to the subnet, the description, and then of course associate it with an emergency location. And then kind of the same thing with wireless access point. You have your BSS ID, and then of course then your emergency location. So you start to see how granular you can get, and this becomes really, really important as you start to build out your topology for network location. So as you start to get to like users and you start to assign like phone numbers, essentially what's going to happen is when you assign a phone number, right, you have to assign an emergency address. So when you click edit, right, and you assign a phone number, it requires you to add a location. Otherwise, it will not let you assign that phone number. So that's why it's really important. Okay, so as far as requesting numbers, right, there's two ways to get numbers with Microsoft, right? One, you can get brand new numbers. So as you get licensing, you can request numbers, and you can do so from here. As far as numbers, you can request numbers from, United States, and then number type, right? For number type, you can do user, right? So you have user, dedicated conference, call queue, call tow, right? So you have all the different things that you can request, or user number. And then you can select the quantity, as well as like search by area code, right? So if you wanted to search for 571, right? I'm from Virginia, so that's my area code, right? I can definitely do that and then search for numbers. And then once the other way to go ahead and get numbers as well as to get ports, right? To do a port request. Now we've built into the wizard here in the admin center. So if you have, if you wanted to do like a port and you wanted to do start migrating your numbers over to Microsoft, you can definitely go through the portal here. They've done a lot of work here and they're going to continue to do a lot of work here to make it even more granular. But it's very crucial for you to kind of read all of this because they do give you all the guidance to making sure that the process is smooth and automated. Because if you don't follow any of these, then you're going to go ahead and get a rejection and then you're going to go through the whole process, wait weeks and then get a rejection and then have to start over again. So it's always good to kind of go through this and kind of review it really closely. If you want to do like porting your number for like a pilot, so it's like a partial port or like a project port, then you would have to contact our PTN teams, our what is it called, our porting transfer number team at Microsoft, and we can work with you on that. Okay. So essentially, that's how you get numbers, right? So you either port them. You can also port service numbers as well. If you're going to do a port order, make sure that you do port orders for either user numbers or you do port orders for service numbers. Never together, because then that's going to cause a lot of complications. Okay. And then this is your emergency policies. Before I get into it, but essentially, what I was talking about earlier, so as far as like once you make an emergency 911 call, is how do you want the notification to happen, right? This is the global, so that means anybody that makes an emergency 911 call, they're going to send a notification, and then you can select a group of people to get a notification, and this will be Teams only, right? But this is what I was talking about earlier, is that you can conference them in, but are muted. That means they cannot unmute themselves, and then conference in and are unmuted, meaning that they will be able to communicate and talk during the call, but they can also mute themselves if they need to. Okay, alrighty. So the last thing I want to talk about is going to be and I'll touch on the direct routing here. So you can actually add your session border controllers here. So add a FQDN. So this is your fully qualified domain name for the SBC. So if you have like SBC1 .contoso1.microsoft.com, right? If I was doing one for Contoso here, that would be your fully qualified domain name, right, for that SBC. And then you can essentially select your port, your settings, and you would have to designate a SIP signaling port. So there's a range of ports that you can choose from. You would just choose a port for that specific SBC to basically allow communication with Teams. And then you can enable a call forwarding history, and essentially you can set up your your settings, as well as location-based routing and media optimization as well. So you can do media bypass as well for here. And then you can do only for local users, and then you can do, CSBC. Okay. Last thing I want to show you is actually the auto attendance and call queues, right? So with I usually start with setting up call queues because then you point your call queues to your auto attendance. So I've created 4, right? So I've done like Teams demo, support, Teams demo, team, and then I've done Spanish Teams voice demo, and then Spanish Teams voice support. So I've actually have 2, right? 4 and 2 of each, essentially. And what's going to happen is once I set it up, and I'm just going to jump into one of them, is you can, assign your demo, assign the resource account, which is going to allow you to essentially get a phone number assigned to it. The number doesn't matter for the call queues. What the main one that you want to worry about is going to be the auto attendant, because that's going to be the display phone number. And so what's going to happen here is that you can actually select your greeting, right? Either no greeting. For the call queue is not really that important because you're going to set up your auto attendant. The auto attendant is actually going to be the one that you do the greeting for. Your music on hold, you can do default, or you can upload your own audio file. So if you want to, create an audio playback and then have it be like, if you want to reach, if you want to get self-service support, please reach our website at, www.gethelp.com as part of your audio file, so it's constantly playing. And then, of course, your call answering. Now, we have options here, so you will not see this until later this year. This is a preview feature. Is essentially the collaboration calling, which is what we announced. Was it last Ignite? I think we announced it, and then we're making it. It's going into public preview at the end of this month. And essentially now you can tie in your teams, your Microsoft Teams. You can tie them directly into your call queue. So now you're not necessarily limited to just user groups. You can essentially tie entire teams, and I'll show you what that looks like here shortly. All right. Okay, so conference mode. This is going to be like the conference mode is going to be really important if you're doing like answer desk or support desk internally. So if you have like a group of students that are providing support and the only people that they're supporting is inside of the campus, you can enable that on, and essentially if it's a Teams client, it's automatically going to get routed instead of going through the PSTN network. It's just going to do peer-to-peer calling inside of the Teams client, and it'll connect to the call queue much faster. So it's faster routing versus PSTN. But these are the routing methods, right? The routing methods allow you to choose how you want calls to be routed. Do you want the routers to be like everyone gets called at the same time, right? And then first agent to pick up basically picks up the call, right? Serial routing, everybody gets called one by one. Round robin, when round robin is used, each call agent will get the same number of calls in the queue as long as idle. It just depends, right? Some organizations have attendant routing, some have serial routing, some have long as idle. You can also take into account like presence-based routing. So if you're currently in a call and you try to call your agents, right? The call on queue will not actually affect, or it will not show up on an agent that's already busy or taking a call. So that's how you kind of get into that. So essentially you can say presence-based routing, or if you're in a meeting, right, it won't actually disturb you as well. And then call agents can opt out of calls. So that was the option that I showed you earlier on the Teams client, where you can opt out of taking calls for a specific group call queue. Now, for your call overflow handling, this is where you choose how many calls you want to support within your call queue. From a technical limitation, we support up to 200 calls per queue. So that means 200 people are waiting on queue. That doesn't mean that's the total number of calls. That means if you have 100 agents and all 100 agents are on a call, then you can actually have a total of like 300 calls, right, supported. It's just the queue, right? How many people they can be on hold. So when that 201st person joining the queue comes in, what happens, right? You want to disconnect the call or redirect the call to voicemail, right? And then you can set up a voicemail system for that. And you can do your transcription. And again, that's what I showed you earlier. When you get a voicemail, it'll do text to speech as well in different languages. And then you can type in a greeting message. So thank you for calling, right? We're currently not available. Please leave your name and name, phone number, and brief description of what you'd like to be demoed, and we'll call you back as soon as possible, right? And what's really nice about this is that it is text to speech. So if you need to change something, you can do so, save it, and within like a minute, it's going to be playing back on the. It's going to be playing back on the playback, essentially on the greeting message. And then of course the call timeout handling, right? How long would you like your end users to be waiting? Now, again, very different, right? You can support up to 45 minutes. And then what do you want it to happen? Redirect. And then you can choose to redirect it to a person. Voice app is going to be like the call queues or the voicemails, right? So if you wanted to redirect it to another queue, so if you have multiple queues and maybe one is not as busy, or one is kind of like the backup for the other, you can kind of interloop each call queue to each other. You can do external phone number or voicemail again, right? And then this is where you can do the transcription greeting message. Okay, so last thing is going to be the auto attendant, right? So with the auto attendant, this is where we can get into like, this is where you start to get like really customized, right? And I have the English Teams VoIP demos, right? So again, we can support a lot of different languages. So these are all the different languages that we support. Actually, it's way more than 14. I thought it was only 14. But you can support, you know, Chinese traditional Taiwan, Chinese traditional Hong Kong, simplified, Catalan, right? English in different dialects. So English, United States, United Kingdom, right? India, Canada, Australia. And then, of course, we have Spanish, Mexico, Spanish, Spain, international, right? So we have a lot of different supportive languages, and then you can enable voice inputs. So this is going to be the voice command, right? So if once we get into here, like we have the call flow, and this is where you can type in your greeting message. You have reached the Teams demo team, right? And we can make changes. So I can say like, today, due to inclement weather, we will be closing, right? We will be closing our offices early at 3 p.m. And we can say today, I can even be more specific, right? March 18th. Right, there you go. And all I have to do is just save, and I'll do that in a little bit. So essentially, then route the call, and this is where you can do your play menu options, right? And you can type in a greeting message. So this is where you can say, thank you for calling Teams Voice. If you'd like to talk to a demo specialist, press 1 or say demo. And this is where you can say the voice command, right? So this is the really nice part about that. So press 1 or say demo, and then you type in what that voice command looks like. If you'd like to get a support from a Teams Voice, please press 2 or say support. If you need support in Spanish, please press 9 or say Spanish, right? And then you can do directory search. So directory search is going to be, dial by, that's going to be like if you know your party's extension, please dial it now. Or if you know your party's name, type in the first 3 letters. However you want to do it, this is where you can do that. Dial by name or dial by extension. So you can actually incorporate that into your auto attendant. And so as we start to get into, okay, now we start setting up your after hours or your business hours, right? You can do 7 to 7, and you're not tied to that, right? You can actually get really granular. So you can tie, I did here an example like 7 to 12:30, 1 to 4, 4:15 to 7, right? So you can break down all the different, like if you have lunch breaks or if you have specific hours of business, you can essentially set that up for yourself as well. And so what happens after your call, after you do set up an after hours. So I'm going to do an example today, like right now, so I'm going to do 2:15, right? Or okay, yeah, 2:15, and then from 2:30, right, to 7. I'll just do that for right now, right? And that's today, right? And then what happens, you have reached us outside of our business hours, please call us back during, right? Essentially. Or you can then route the call to, and then you can essentially redirect the call to voicemail, right? And boom, you can set it to voicemail. Or you can just say, disconnect the call, or you can send it to another auto attendant or call queue, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do within this auto attendant, right? And so I'm actually not going to do it because then it'll mess with everything. Yep. Oh, whoops. All right. All right. 7 to 7. Yep. So limit. All right. So now that I set that up, I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to go ahead and go to, I think it was in call flow. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I got it back. Okay. So we've done that. Now we're going to go ahead and set up our, we're going to go ahead and set up our, holidays. So this is where you can add your holidays. Again, you can do that and validate, right? I haven't set up the dates for that, but essentially you can do that, right? You can do your holidays. You can also set up your, what happens in your greeting, and then what do you want it to do? Redirect to another voice app. Essentially, you can set up everything there, right? And that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and call, and I think it was 980-288-4412, right?
You have reached the Teams demo team. Please listen carefully to the following menu options as they may have changed. Given our high demand for demos, you may experience higher than normal wait times. Today, March 18th, due to inclement weather, we will be closing our offices early at 3 p.m. Thank you for calling Teams Voice Demo. If you would like to talk to a demo specialist, please press 1 or say demo. If you would like to get support on Teams Voice, please press 2 or say support. If you need support in Spanish, please press 9 or say Spanish. Gracias por llamarnos. Por favor, escuche nuestras opciones que pueden haber cambiado. Para asistencia en demostraciones, presione 1. Si quisiera ayuda técnica, presione 2.
And so now we get into the call flow. Right? And now we start to get into the entire call flow now. So what happens? I'm getting a call now, right? Right, so I'm gonna go ahead and wait what happens to see. I'm just gonna drop the call, right? It should be going into the next one. So if I drop, it should be trying to reach out to the other person. So it's going through different groups. Since I belong to different groups, it's now gonna go to the next person, right? And if I don't pick up, it's gonna go to the next one. Okay, so essentially now we get back into this call flow. Like, what do I want to do? Call park, consult, hold, transfer, etc. And I can start recording if I need to manually. Okay, so that's what I have on that. One last thing I wanted to do, and again, it's going to be, and I'm going to show now, is going to be at this device. Right, so the last thing I wanted to show you is the collaborative calling, right? And I'm going to switch presentations here. So, and I'm going to share. Share video. Okay, and I do apologize if it's a little bit wonky, but I wanted to show this. And what I wanted to show is that within this, I'm showing the Teams collaboration. So this is actually new within Microsoft, right? And what we're doing is now we're integrating with the Teams channels. So we have our channels here, and we have a tab called a tab that is called calls. And essentially what's really nice about this is that we get the entire history of the calls here. We also get a dial pad as well as all the agents that are available. So if I wanted to opt myself out of calls, I can do so, but I can also get real-time view of everybody else that is in this call. I don't know if it's coming in clear. But yeah, so essentially that's what I wanted to showcase. It's something that's really new. This is supposed to kind of provide a little bit better guidance. So if you can see like incoming voicemails as well. And then you can kind of see exactly what's happening from the agent side as well. And you can opt yourself out of calls, and you can see everybody else that's part of this group right within there, who's available, who's on a call, who's not. Are you guys able to see that, or am I not showing you anything? All right. You guys can see that now, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so this is essentially where I was talking about where now we can get into like the teams. Again, I have multiple, so if I have our call queues, right, I can go into my calls and I can see like everything that's here. So I can see like who's online, who's offline, right, away or not, and I can see full actions here. So if somebody was away, now I can see they're back online. It'll give me real-time view here, and I can essentially integrate it, and I can see that they're in the queue. See? So those are kind of some of the advantages that we have right within there. You can also opt yourself out of taking calls. So if I wanted to, I can, take myself out of the queue. So I'm no longer taking queues from within here. I have full call history for the entire queue. So it's not just for myself, right? It's actually for the entire queue. So from a contact center solution, it's kind of getting us closer to what a lot of people are asking for, but it's still, pretty, I would say basic to intermediate. A lot of the more advanced features are going to be still requiring a contact center partner for that. Alrighty.
Andreas, I know that Andre and Scott have been doing a great job of answering people's questions as they're coming up in the chat, but I wonder if we wanted to just give a minute for folks that still had other questions or that wanted to ask their question to either do a hand raise or come off mute.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So that is all I had for presentation and demo. So I can leave the next 7 minutes for questions. And I will follow up. So, okay. So I was just saying that I will follow up with links to decks on what I presented. They're a little bit of extended decks, right? So they have a lot more content than what I shared. It's a lot more thorough. There's demos on the decks as well, and as well as links to this recording and links to resources to kind of help you get started as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And then if you want to come off mute or you want to type questions,